Welcome to the European Parliament in Strasbourg for Talking Europe. Is it time for the EU to review how it handles free movement of people? The United Kingdom has recently stirred up a debate on changing European laws on labour migration. The British government says it wants to prevent people from Eastern European countries to exploit its generous welfare system. But critics suspect David Cameron is pandering to the UK Independence Party in a bid to try and win back voters from the anti-Europe party. Joining me on this set, Charles Tannock, welcome to Talking Europe. You're a British MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists. You represent London, a city that has seen a very large influx of migrants. Ivailo Kalfin, also with us here. You're a Bulgarian MEP from the Socialists and Democrats. You're a former Bulgarian Foreign Affairs Minister. On the 1st of January, Bulgarian and Romanian workers gained the same rights as other EU citizens to work in the UK, as well as 8 other European countries. But Charles Tannock, there hasn't been a day without tabloids publishing alarming articles on the risk of Bulgarians and Romanians flooding into Britain. What has really changed since the 1st of January, and why is it that British politicians are so worried about these changes?
Well, I think you have to understand that there are enormous pressures on public resources. The British population has increased by more than 3 million people in the last decade. 2/3 of the migrants who have settled in Britain come from non-EU countries, so we have to get it into proportion. But more than 1 million people came from the Eastern European countries following the last wave of enlargement. And at that time, of course, Britain was fairly alone in opening its doors. Other countries did not have the same.
That was in 2005.
Well, 2005. And now, of course, other countries have also opened their doors at the same time to Bulgarians and Romanians. So far, there hasn't been this large movement, new movement, that was predicted by parties like UKIP. But I as a London resident, see enormous pressure on the local GP, on not being able to get my children into a local school. And one of the reasons, of course, is the migratory pressure. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for David Cameron to respond to the public mood. It's not about UKIP. It's about a real problem at the doorstep when we are campaigning. People have put immigration at the very top of the list. And clearly, David Cameron wants to respond, and particularly the issue of benefit tourism. It is not acceptable for people to come from much poorer countries like Bulgaria and Romania to Britain purely to land themselves on the British taxpayer. That is not acceptable, and he's perfectly justified in tightening all those various generous social security arrangements.
Ivailo Kalfin, do you understand the fears of David Cameron? Is there a problem regarding Bulgarian and Romanian citizens flooding into Britain, as we hear, to exploit the welfare system?
No, and the facts show that this is not happening since the beginning of the year, and I'm sure that this is not going to happen in the coming months. My problem is not the care about the social system. I mean, every country, the social systems in Europe, they're national. They're supported by the taxpayers in the member states. They're different. They're not. You don't have social security mobility or social benefits mobility in Europe.
But well, you do, I'm sorry. People come to Britain and they draw social security from Eastern European countries without having had paid taxes in our country or lived there for more than 3 months.
That is, yes, that is maybe true. But if we take the figures and see how many people are coming to Britain and what they're doing exactly, you would see that, for example, Bulgarians, I took the difficulty to find some statistics. Out of any 1,000 British, you have 1 Bulgarian being present there. And one of every 600 unemployed people is Bulgarian. In UK, altogether, you have 140 Bulgarian women that have maternity benefits. So that's really not a pressure. I mean, and the problem there is that...
You're telling us those Bulgarians who go to Britain want to work there and
they
contribute to...
And all the statistics show that they're working or studying in the UK, they're paying their taxes, they're contributing to the UK economy, and this is a problem for Bulgaria because they're not working in Bulgaria. I mean, this is a challenge for countries like mine to keep these people back home and to make them create value in Bulgaria. As far as we are speaking about labor markets and labor mobility, this is not abuse of the social system. The abuse of the social system is for guys who do not want to work, who just want to commute to the benefits. And I think that all the facts show that this is not the case.
Nobody is saying it's the majority of migrants from Eastern Europe. In fact, it's a very small minority. But David Cameron is perfectly justified in closing some of the loopholes. For instance, my wife and I, we lost our child benefit this year because we're deemed to be earning too much money. But it's not acceptable that a Bulgarian or a Romanian or a Pole can draw child benefit back home for the children that have been left behind, whereas people like myself who've paid taxes all our lives are losing ours in a climate of austerity. So all that the Prime Minister and the government are doing is closing certain loopholes, making absolutely sure that people that come to Britain are coming to look for work. And if they don't find work, they have to return to their countries. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think that's perfectly consistent with the treaties, which is not a freedom of movement of people to land themselves on social security. It's a freedom of movement to come and find work.
Well, before we continue our conversation, let's watch our short report.
More than 4 million Romanians and Bulgarians have emigrated in the past 25 years since the fall of communism in 1989 and accession to the EU in 2007. Many went to work in Western Europe, but working abroad is often seen as a necessary evil rather than a dream.
If I had a better salary here, I would stay in my own country, close to my family and parents.
Fears in Britain that tens of thousands of immigrants could arrive on its shores have stirred anger in Romania and Bulgaria. After all, migration is not all one way, and thousands of Western Europeans like Richard have settled in Romania and Bulgaria in recent years.
People always have preconceived ideas about things, but you can never really make a true judgment until you visit. So, and a lot of my friends come from UK and always very pleasantly surprised, I think, and generally they come for a second and third visit.
While Britain is pushing to restrict so-called benefit tourism, Bulgaria and Romania say there will be no mass exodus. Nobody really knows how many people will choose to go abroad, but we won't have to wait too long to find out.
Ivailo Calvin, free movement of people is one of the core principles of the European Union. But when I listen to both of you, you telling me that there's a brain drain going on in Bulgaria, you're telling me that there is pressure on British workers because new migrant workers are arriving in Britain. This is showing the limits of the single market, isn't it?
This is not showing the limits, this is showing the benefits of the single market. I mean, if you think in economic terms, this is creating much better efficiency of the market. The problem is, again, when we come back to the national point of view on the European market. If we speak about the European economy as a whole, it's a great thing to have the labor mobility, and that's why this is one of the core pillars of the European integration. From the social point of view, I agree that we could think about some, I wouldn't say restrictions, but for example, same labor rights and not to allow social dumping, for example, or not to allow going below the minimum salary, etc., etc. All these labor regulations are absolutely justified and acceptable. But this is not the way to move the free will of people to move around. Again, that's a problem for the countries of origin rather than for the countries of
Do you agree that it's more a problem for Bulgaria than for Britain?
I'm generally in favour of freedom of movement, but provided it's reciprocal. And there can be no doubt that partly because of our non-contributory benefit system, which is more generous than almost anywhere else in Europe, because you don't have to pay in to get stuff out, to get financial rewards out from the Social Security, partly because of the English language pool, the fact that people learn English all over Europe. I don't think there are many British
and a more flexible labour market, let's say.
I'm not sure there are many British workers being able to go and compete in the Bulgarian market because they wouldn't speak Bulgarian, just to give you a simple practical reason why it's been mainly an asymmetric flow. There are very few Brits working in Poland. So I'm all in favour of freedom of movement. There are a lot of Brits living in Spain, mainly retired, France, Italy and so on. That's great. But I do accept that when there is a large disparity for new countries entering the European Union in terms of income income per capita, that it would be reasonable, and this is what David Cameron has mooted, to have a debate on whether we should be entitled to have caps on the total number of people allowed to come in and seek jobs, because there is other danger of serious problems of putting our own people out of jobs and therefore unrest.
Ivailo Kalfin, as I said earlier, there isn't a single day without British tabloids running these alarming articles. How is the story perceived in Sofia? What do Bulgarians think about this?
What is not acceptable, this is the stigmatization. Saying that Bulgarians are sitting on the border and waiting for the lifting of the restrictions. What is the fact is that the restrictions were left in 20 of the EU member states before the 1st of January. And in some others, like France, for example, you have a list of professions. In France, there were 350 professions that were also open. So this is not that you are opening now the...
So January 1st wasn't a revolution.
So it's not a revolution. People are not waiting on the border just to have the possibility to go to the UK.
Do we have an idea of how many Bulgarians moved to Britain since the beginning of January?
Oh, very few. I mean, the statistics are even not there, but very, very few people. I mean, you remember there were reportages of British MPs waiting on the airport on the 1st of January to receive.
I would totally agree that the numbers are not as great as UKIP have predicted. That's perfectly true. I think most people who wanted to get a job from Bulgaria and Romania, there were loopholes in terms of self-employment. I mean, you know, people like window cleaners could come and be self-employed. There were lots of loopholes in the association agreement, and there's well over 100,000, I think it's 200,000 Romanians and Bulgarians already living and working in the United Kingdom. Very large numbers have come already. So I never thought there'd be this mass movement on the 1st of January. Let's wait in 6 months' time, because when we had the opening of the borders back in 2004-05, it did take a few months before the numbers really started to increase. So I'm not predicting the big numbers, but there is a bigger issue, particularly if the EU carries on enlarging to the Western Balkans and even to other countries like Ukraine or Turkey or whatever, that this total freedom of movement I don't think is sustainable, particularly when our social security systems are different, when our GDP per capita are so different, when wages are so different.
Ivailo Kalfin, do you fear that this current debate in Britain, but I have to say also in a number of other countries, including Germany, will lead to drastic restrictions and potentially threaten the freedom of movement for workers within the EU?
I hope not, because this argumentation is, for example, I'm sure very badly going to be accepted by the employers also, being in the UK or in the other countries. Restricting free movement, capping the number of European nationals that could move there, should be based on some real figures. When you open your market for countries, for third countries, and you restrict European migration, then you don't have a clear explanation for that. I can give you an example again for the UK. For the last 2 years, the Bulgarian and Romanian also students were discriminated in the UK because there was a very difficult procedure to receive a work permit for students, which was coming automatically with the visa for students for third countries.
Well, it's time to welcome our partner in this program, Dave Keating from European Voice, publisher of a weekly newspaper on European news. Dave, welcome. European Voice provides independent insight into the Brussels and Strasbourg. By the way, we're in Strasbourg this way. Now, together we'll look at this week in Europe, and it was, I believe, a bad week for...
Unsurprisingly, for François Hollande, the French president, who saw his annual press conference largely overshadowed by revelations that he is reportedly conducting an illicit affair with a French actress. This was obviously terrible timing for Hollande, coming just days before a very important press conference, but it's also terrible timing for Europe. It's a bit of a cliche, but Europe depends on the Franco-German engine to drive its economy, and right now only half of that engine is working. So people working here in European policy are really desperately looking to France for some bold action to revive its economic fortune. Hollande was hoping to really have some new proposals on that, but it was largely overshadowed by the affair. And if this affair ends up really hobbling Hollande for the rest of his presidency, it would also hobble France and also hobble Europe. So whether they like it or not, Europeans' fortunes right now are very much tied up in the personal fortunes of François Hollande.
And on a more positive note, it was a good week for...
It was a good week for the European Parliament here in Strasbourg. The city of Strasbourg has been trying to collect 3 million euros in fees for garbage collection. And last week, a French court ruled that the parliament does not have to pay these fees. The parliament was saying that these fees constitute a tax. EU institutions do not have to pay tax in the countries which host them. And the court agreed with them. So the parliament is off the hook for this 3 million euros, which is good news at a time of austerity and budget cutting. And anyone who works here in Strasbourg knows that this building generates a lot of garbage, so it's a good news.
Should be closed down. It's not good news if it means keeping Strasbourg alive, isn't it? You know.
Many MEPs feel that way.
That's another debate. That's another debate whether all sessions should be held in Brussels. Do you agree that it was a bad week for Hollande? Because some of the French commentators saw a turning point in this presidency. François Hollande turning into a social democrat. Is that your perception?
Well, certainly good news for the croissant business. I think croissants have raised their profile in the UK in the morning. I personally have no interest in the private sex life of the President of France, but I have an interest in French economic prosperity, and I think that the socialist hardline model of very high taxes is not working. He needs to inject growth back into the economy, create jobs, reduce taxation. And if this galvanizes the president to having a new economic paradigm for France, I welcome it. Many of the wealthier French have been talking about the immigration debate again. Many of the wealthier French have come to live in London to escape French taxes. So, you know, if France wants to maintain its sort of wealthy class investing money, creating jobs, it needs to basically look at its economic model, its socialist economic model.
You're not going to cap wealthy French coming to London.
No, we're not. We welcome them, yes.
You welcome those wealthy French. Now, what about your front page at European Voice this week?
The front page this week featured an article detailing Catherine Ashton, who is the foreign policy chief of the EU's choice to have a bureaucrat serve as the next EU ambassador to the United States rather than a politician. Word is that she's chosen David O'Sullivan, who is a former Secretary General of the European Commission.
With TTIP, I suppose the argument would be it's such a technical process of organising and monitoring the negotiations. You need somebody who really understands trade technicalities.
Yes, certainly it's probably an indication of the priorities between the two sides at the moment.
OK, Dave Keating, Ivailo Kalfin, Charles Tannock, thank you very much for taking part in this edition of Talking Europe. Now, please stay with me. I'll return just after the news break. I'll bring you an interview with Dimitris Kourkoulas. He's Greece's European Affairs Minister. As you know, Greece currently holds the rotating presidency of the European Union.